Homelessness is a growing crisis in many parts of Europe, affecting millions and highlighting the urgent need for policy intervention and support systems. From housing shortages to economic instability, the causes vary, but the impact remains devastating for those without a stable place to call home. Today, we'll uncover the top 10 countries in Europe with the highest homeless rates. Using the latest data, we'll explore the scope of this issue and how these nations are grappling with one of society's most pressing challenges. Let's begin. Number 10. Portugal. Portugal, with slightly over 10 homeless individuals per 10,000 residents. While Portugal's homeless rate appears lower compared to other countries on this list, the issue remains significant. According to a report by Publico, over 4,000 people in Portugal are experiencing homelessness, with major cities like Lisbon and Porto being the hardest hit. A housing affordability crisis has been a primary driver. Rental prices in Lisbon have surged by 37% since 2019, forcing many families out of their homes and onto the streets. The COVID-19 pandemic further exacerbated this situation, with job losses pushing vulnerable groups into homelessness. Nonprofit organizations such as Asociação Nacional de Municípios are working tirelessly to address the issue. Their efforts include providing temporary shelters and food programs for those in need. However, resources remain limited. Portugal's government has introduced measures such as its National Strategy for the Integration of Homeless People, which aims to provide housing and support services by 2030. Despite these efforts, the implementation has been slow. While small towns report fewer incidents, urban centers bear the brunt of the crisis, with public spaces often becoming temporary shelters for the homeless. Portugal's focus on long-term housing solutions offers hope, but significant challenges remain in addressing the needs of its growing homeless population. Number 9. Italy. Italy, facing a rate of 16.3 homeless individuals per 10,000 people, according to Flow data. Italy's homelessness crisis affects over 50,000 individuals nationwide, with Milan, Rome, and Naples seeing the largest concentrations, as per Istat. The situation has worsened over the past decade due to economic stagnation and rising living costs. A major issue is the lack of affordable housing. Rental prices in major Italian cities have increased by 15% over the last 5 years, leaving many unable to afford basic accommodations. For immigrants and low-income families, the situation is particularly dire. Many homeless individuals in Italy rely on charitable organizations such as Caritas and Sant'Egidio Community, which provide meals, clothing, and temporary shelters. However, these services can only reach a fraction of those in need. The Italian government has pledged to expand housing assistance programs, but bureaucratic delays and limited funding have slowed progress. Critics argue that local governments must play a more active role in addressing the crisis. Public spaces in cities like Milan have become makeshift shelters, with thousands sleeping on streets, in parks, and under bridges. The situation often escalates during winter, when emergency services are overwhelmed. Italy's rich history and tourism appeal often mask the underlying housing issues that affect its most vulnerable populations. Addressing homelessness remains a critical challenge for the nation. Number 8. Slovenia. Slovenia, experiencing approximately 16.8 homeless individuals per 10,000 residents, based on Flow data. Slovenia's homelessness issue is often underreported, but the data reveals a troubling reality. Over 3,500 people in the country are without permanent shelter, according to Statistical Office of Slovenia. Economic inequality and a lack of affordable housing are key contributors. Rental prices in Ljubljana, Slovenia's capital, have risen by 20% since 2018, making it increasingly difficult for low-income families to secure housing. Many of Slovenia's homeless population are single adults, with a growing number of young people and seniors also affected. Shelters in urban centers provide temporary relief, but demand often exceeds capacity, especially during harsh winters. Local organizations such as the Slovenian Red Cross are actively working to provide food, clothing, and emergency shelter to those in need. However, funding remains a challenge, limiting their ability to expand services. The government has introduced measures to combat homelessness, including subsidies for low-income renters and funding for temporary shelters. However, critics argue that these initiatives lack long-term solutions. Rural areas, while less affected, report increasing cases of hidden homelessness, where individuals live in inadequate or overcrowded conditions. Slovenia's efforts to address this issue show promise, but sustained action is needed to reduce the impact of homelessness on its vulnerable populations. Number 7. Austria. Austria, with a rate of 21.7 homeless individuals per 10,000 people, according to Flow data. Austria's homelessness crisis impacts an estimated 22,000 people annually, with Vienna accounting for nearly half of this figure, according to Statistics Austria. Rising housing costs and income disparities are the primary drivers of this issue. The average rent in Vienna has risen by 18% over the past 5 years, pushing many low-income individuals and families into precarious living situations. Immigrants and asylum seekers are particularly vulnerable, often facing difficulties accessing housing. Emergency shelters in Vienna provide temporary relief, but many operate at full capacity, especially during winter. Organizations like Volkshilfe and Caritas Wien play a vital role in providing food, clothing, and shelter to those in need. Austria's government has implemented programs such as Housing First, which focuses on providing permanent housing before addressing other issues like employment or health. While these initiatives show promise, funding and scalability remain challenges. The homeless population includes not only long-term unhoused individuals, but also those in transitional housing or facing imminent eviction. This highlights the need for preventative measures. Public awareness campaigns and community support have helped reduce the stigma surrounding homelessness, encouraging more citizens to get involved in addressing the issue. Austria's commitment to combating homelessness is evident, but the rising demand for affordable housing underscores the need for more robust policies. Number 6. Latvia. Latvia, reporting nearly 32 homeless individuals per 10,000 residents, based on flow data over a given period. Latvia faces one of the most significant homelessness crises in Eastern Europe, with an estimated 6,000 individuals affected annually, according to Eurostat. Economic challenges and inadequate housing policies have exacerbated the issue. The capital city, Riga, is the epicenter of the crisis, with homelessness particularly visible in urban areas. Rising living costs and unemployment have forced many individuals into precarious situations. For some, job insecurity leaves little room for consistent rent payments. Shelters in Riga provide temporary accommodation, but resources are stretched thin. On cold winter nights, occupancy rates often exceed 120%, leaving some without a safe place to stay. The Latvian government has introduced initiatives to tackle homelessness, such as subsidies for low-income individuals and emergency housing programs. However, critics argue that these measures are not comprehensive enough to address the root causes. Nonprofit organizations like Samaritans Latvia are stepping in to fill the gaps, providing food, temporary shelter, and social support. Yet, these efforts often depend on inconsistent funding and donations. Rural homelessness is less visible, but still significant, with many living in substandard or makeshift housing without access to basic utilities. These individuals often go uncounted in official statistics. Latvia's growing homelessness crisis underscores the need for targeted reforms, particularly in creating affordable housing options and improving economic stability. Number 5. Ireland. Ireland, experiencing about 25.3 homeless individuals per 10,000 residents. Ireland has one of the fastest-growing homelessness rates in Europe, with over 12,000 people officially recorded as homeless in 2025, according to Focus Ireland. Families with children now account for nearly 40% of the homeless population, reflecting the severity of the housing crisis. Dublin, the capital city, is at the heart of the problem. Skyrocketing rental prices, up 30% over the past 5 years, have left many unable to afford basic housing. A one-bedroom apartment in Dublin now averages £2,000 per month, according to Daft.ie. The government's Rebuilding Ireland initiative has pledged to tackle the crisis, focusing on increasing social housing and regulating rents. While the program has shown some progress, critics argue that the pace of development is too slow to meet the growing demand. Charities like the Peter McVerry Trust and Focus Ireland play a crucial role in addressing homelessness, providing shelter, advocacy, and support services. However, demand for their services continues to outstrip supply. Emergency accommodation facilities are consistently full, with families often placed in hotels or hostels for extended periods. This temporary housing solution is both costly and inadequate for long-term stability. The economic strain on Ireland's lower-income households is evident, with many spending over 50% of their income on rent. This leaves little room for savings, making even minor financial setbacks catastrophic. Ireland's homelessness crisis remains a pressing issue, requiring bold policy changes and increased funding to ensure that its most vulnerable populations are not left behind. Number 4. Germany. Germany, with approximately 25.8 homeless individuals per 10,000 people. Germany, despite being Europe's largest economy, is grappling with a significant homelessness crisis. According to BAG Wohnungslosenhilfe, over 300,000 people in Germany experience homelessness each year. The problem is most acute in cities like Berlin, Hamburg, and Munich, where rising rents and a shortage of affordable housing have displaced thousands. In Berlin, rents have increased by 42% since 2015, leaving many unable to keep up with the costs. Immigrants and asylum seekers are disproportionately affected, often facing barriers to accessing housing and social services. Temporary shelters are overcrowded, and many individuals resort to sleeping in parks or train stations. The German government has introduced measures to combat homelessness, such as increasing funding for social housing and expanding the Housing First model. However, critics argue that the housing shortage remains a bottleneck for progress. Nonprofits like Berliner Stadtmission and Caritas Deutschland play a crucial role in providing food, clothing, and emergency shelter. These organizations also advocate for long-term solutions to the housing crisis. The winter months pose additional risks for Germany's homeless population, with freezing temperatures claiming dozens of lives each year. Emergency warming shelters offer temporary relief, but they often reach capacity quickly. Germany's homelessness crisis reflects broader issues of inequality and housing policy, requiring sustained investment and systemic change to reverse the trend. Number 3. Czechia. Czechia, facing a rate of 28.4 homeless individuals per 10,000 residents. Czechia has one of the highest homelessness rates in Central Europe, with an estimated 30,000 people affected annually, according to Czech Statistical Office. Economic disparities and a lack of affordable housing are key drivers of the crisis. Prague, the nation's capital, bears the brunt of the issue. Rental prices have increased by 25% over the past 5 years, making housing unaffordable for many low-income residents. A one-bedroom apartment in Prague now costs an average of €750 per month. Emergency shelters and social housing programs are struggling to keep up with demand. Many homeless individuals rely on nonprofits like NAGE and Armada Spacey for food, temporary shelter, and support services. The government has introduced initiatives to address homelessness, including increased funding for affordable housing and programs aimed at reintegrating homeless individuals into the workforce. However, progress has been slow and resources remain limited. Rural areas report hidden homelessness, where individuals live in overcrowded or substandard housing without access to basic utilities. These cases often go unnoticed in official statistics. The impact of homelessness is particularly severe during the winter months, with freezing temperatures posing life-threatening risks. Temporary warming shelters in Prague and other cities provide some relief, but are often at capacity. Czechia's homelessness crisis highlights the need for comprehensive reforms, including better housing policies and social safety nets, to address this growing issue. Number 2. France. France, experiencing about 30.7 homeless individuals per 10,000 people. France faces one of Europe's most pressing homelessness crises, with an estimated 330,000 individuals affected nationwide, according to Fondation Abbé Pierre. Major cities like Paris, Marseille, and Lyon are at the forefront of this growing issue. In Paris alone, nearly 30,000 people are estimated to be homeless, with shelters operating at full capacity throughout the year. Rising rental costs in urban areas have exacerbated the problem, with the average monthly rent in Paris reaching £1,400 for a one-bedroom apartment. The COVID-19 pandemic intensified the situation, as job losses and financial instability forced thousands into precarious living conditions. Immigrants and refugees, who make up a significant portion of the homeless population, often face additional challenges accessing housing and social services. The French government has launched several initiatives to tackle homelessness, including the Logement d'abord Housing First program, which aims to provide stable housing before addressing other social and economic issues. Despite these efforts, progress has been slow. and demand for affordable housing continues to outpace supply. Nonprofit organizations like Emmaus and Secours Catholique play a vital role in supporting France's homeless population. These groups provide food, temporary shelter, and advocacy for systemic changes to address the root causes of homelessness. Winter in France poses life-threatening risks for those sleeping rough. Emergency shelters in cities like Paris and Marseille are often overwhelmed during cold weather, prompting calls for expanded resources. France's homelessness crisis reflects broader issues of economic inequality and housing shortages, requiring a sustained, multifaceted approach to improve the lives of its most vulnerable citizens. Number 1. England. England, leading Europe with approximately 43 homeless individuals per 10,000 residents. England has the highest rate of homelessness in Europe, with over 280,000 people affected, according to Shelter UK. This figure includes individuals sleeping rough, living in temporary accommodations, or at risk of losing their homes. London is the epicenter of England's homelessness crisis, accounting for nearly a quarter of the country's homeless population. The average rent in London has skyrocketed to £2,300 per month for a one-bedroom apartment, making housing unaffordable for many low-income families. The shortage of affordable housing is a key factor driving homelessness. Recent data from the UK government shows that social housing availability has declined by 8% over the past decade, leaving vulnerable groups with limited options. Emergency shelters and temporary accommodations are operating at full capacity, often forcing families to live in unsuitable conditions such as hostels or shared housing. This has led to increased stress and instability, particularly for children. Nonprofits like Shelter and Crisis are at the forefront of tackling homelessness in England. They provide vital services such as legal aid, housing advice, and emergency support for those in need. However, the demand for their services far exceeds their capacity. The government has introduced policies such as the Homelessness Reduction Act and increased funding for local councils to address the crisis. Despite these efforts, critics argue that long-term solutions, including the construction of affordable housing, are urgently needed. England's homelessness crisis remains a stark reminder of the country's growing inequality. Without significant reforms and investments, the most vulnerable will continue to bear the brunt of this pressing issue. From England's alarming rates to Portugal's quieter crisis, homelessness in Europe remains a complex and multifaceted issue. Each of these countries faces unique challenges in addressing the needs of their most vulnerable populations, with housing shortages and economic instability as common threads. Which country's situation surprised you the most? Let us know in the comments, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and explore Globe Discoveries for more eye-opening insights into the state of our world. Thank you for watching.